The morning air was crisp and cold as the black cars pulled up to Westminster Abbey inside the lead vehicle. 10-year-old Prince George adjusted his dark blue coat for the third time, while his younger sister Charlotte smoothed down her burgundy dress. 5-year-old Louis bounced excitedly in his seat, pressing his nose against the window to see the crowds of people waiting outside. "Remember what we practiced?" their mother Catherine whispered gently, checking each child's appearance one final time. The Together at Christmas service had become one of the most important events of the year, and this was the 5th time the family would attend together. George nodded seriously, understanding the weight of the occasion. As the future king, he felt the responsibility more each year. Charlotte smiled confidently, always eager to meet new people and show her best manners. Louis, however, was simply thrilled to be included in such a grand adventure. The car doors opened, and the flash of cameras immediately filled the air. The 3 children stepped out carefully, walking close to their parents as they made their way toward the ancient abbey doors. The crowd behind the barriers called out their names, and Charlotte gave a small wave while George maintained his composed expression inside the abbey. The atmosphere was magical. Hundreds of candles flickered along the walls, casting dancing shadows on the stone pillars. The scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air from the enormous Christmas trees that decorated every corner. A choir was practicing softly in the background, their voices echoing through the vast space. Louis's eyes grew wide as he took in the grandeur around him. He had been to many formal events, but the abbey always amazed him with its towering ceilings and colorful stained glass windows. Charlotte walked beside him, pointing out different details she remembered from previous visits. "Look at that angel," she whispered, gesturing toward a carved figure high above them. "It looks like it's watching over everyone." The service was designed to celebrate community heroes and ordinary people who had done extraordinary things during the year. Each child carried a small program with the names and stories of the guests who would be honored. George read through his carefully, while Charlotte looked around at the gathering crowd with curiosity. As they took their seats in the front rows, Louis fidgeted slightly with excitement. The abbey was filling with people from all walks of life: teachers, nurses, firefighters, volunteers, and families who had overcome difficult challenges. It was exactly what the Christmas service was meant to celebrate. The Archbishop of Canterbury appeared at the front, dressed in his ceremonial robes. His warm smile immediately put everyone at ease, especially the children in the congregation. He had a special talent for making formal services feel welcoming and personal. "Welcome, everyone, to our 5th annual Together at Christmas service," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the ancient space. "Today we gather to celebrate the spirit of giving, kindness, and community that makes this season so special." George sat up straight, listening intently to every word. He understood that being present at this service was not just about attending another royal event, but about showing respect for the people who worked hard to help others. Throughout the year, Charlotte noticed a group of children from a local school choir preparing to perform near the altar. They looked nervous but excited, whispering among themselves and adjusting their matching red scarves. She remembered how nervous she had felt during her first public appearances and felt sympathy for them. Louis, meanwhile, was fascinated by the musicians tuning their instruments in a side chapel. The soft sounds of violins and flutes mixed with the gentle murmur of conversation as more guests found their seats. He loved music and often asked to hear his mother play piano at home. The service officially began with a beautiful hymn that filled the entire abbey. The 3 royal children sang along, their clear young voices joining hundreds of others in the traditional Christmas carol. The sound was so powerful that it seemed to make the very stones of the ancient building vibrate with joy. As the music continued, stories began to be shared about the remarkable people gathered in the congregation. There was Maria, a nurse who had worked extra shifts to care for elderly patients during a difficult winter. There was James, a teacher who had started a food program for families in need. Each story highlighted someone who had made a difference in their community. George listened to each account with growing admiration. These were the real heroes, he thought, not people with titles or crowns, but individuals who chose to help others without expecting recognition or reward. It made him think about how he could use his position to make a positive difference in the world. Charlotte was particularly moved by the story of Emma, a young girl who had organized toy drives for homeless shelters despite being only 12 years old. It inspired her to think about projects she might start to help children in need. She had always enjoyed organizing things and felt excited about the possibility of using that skill for good. Louis may not have understood all the details of the stories being shared, but he could feel the warmth and happiness in the room. Everyone seemed genuinely pleased to be there, celebrating people who had done kind things for others. It made him want to be kind too. In whatever way a 5-year-old could manage, the first reading came from a group of young people who had volunteered at food banks throughout the year. Their words about sharing and caring for neighbors resonated throughout the Abbey, reminding everyone of the true meaning of Christmas beyond presents and celebrations. As the service continued, the 3 children remained engaged and attentive, each processing the experience in their own way. They were not just royal children fulfilling a duty, but young people learning about service, compassion, and the importance of community, lessons that would shape who they would become in the years ahead. The Abbey grew even more beautiful as the service progressed. Soft, golden light from the afternoon sun streamed through the magnificent stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the stone floor. The children watched in fascination as the colored light moved slowly across their hands and programs. A special moment arrived when local school children began to perform. The choir that Charlotte had noticed earlier stepped forward, their red scarves bright against the ancient backdrop. Their conductor, a cheerful woman with silver hair, raised her hands to begin their song. The children's voices rose in perfect harmony, singing a modern arrangement of Silent Night that brought tears to many eyes in the congregation. George found himself genuinely moved by their performance. Remembering his own school concerts and how proud his parents had looked in the audience, Charlotte leaned forward slightly, completely captivated by the young performers. She could see some of them were nervous, their hands shaking slightly as they held their songbooks, but their voices remained strong and clear. It reminded her of her own piano recitals and the butterfly feelings she got before performing. Louis clapped enthusiastically when the song ended, his applause echoing through the Abbey before others joined in. His genuine joy and excitement seemed to lift the spirits of everyone around him, including the young choir members who beamed with pride at the warm reception. The Archbishop returned to the front to introduce the next portion of the service, which would highlight healthcare workers who had gone above and beyond their duties. He spoke about the importance of recognizing everyday heroes who often worked without recognition or fanfare. Dr. Sarah Shun, a pediatric nurse from a London hospital, was invited to share her story. She approached the lectern with quiet confidence, her simple blue dress a stark contrast to the ornate surroundings. As she began to speak, her voice carried the warmth and compassion that made her so beloved by her young patients. This year has taught me that healing comes not just from medicine, but from kindness, patience, and hope, she said, her words resonating throughout the Abbey. Every day I see children facing difficult challenges with incredible bravery, and they inspire me to be better. George listened intently to Dr. Chun's words, thinking about the times he had visited hospitals with his parents. He remembered meeting sick children who had smiled despite their pain, and he began to understand what true courage really meant. It wasn't about being brave in battles or adventures, but about facing everyday difficulties with grace and determination. Charlotte was particularly touched by Dr. Chun's description of creating art therapy programs for children in the hospital. The idea of using creativity to help people heal fascinated her, as she loved both art and helping others feel better when they were sad or hurt. Following Dr. Chun's inspiring speech, a group of teenagers from various youth organizations presented readings about hope and community service. Each young person represented a different charity or volunteer group, showing the diverse ways people their age were making positive changes in their communities. Louis watched with wide eyes as teenagers not much older than George spoke confidently about their projects. There was Marcus, who had organized sports programs for children in underserved neighborhoods, and Zara, who had created a pen pal program connecting elderly residents with local students. The royal children began to understand that making a difference didn't require grand gestures or royal titles. These young people had identified problems in their communities and found creative ways to help, using their own skills and interests to benefit others. As the readings continued, beautiful instrumental music played softly in the background. A string quartet composed of music teachers from local schools provided gentle melodies that enhanced the emotional impact of each story being shared. The music reminded George of the piano lessons he had been taking, and he found himself identifying different instruments and noting how they worked together to create something beautiful. It was like a metaphor for the community service being celebrated, individuals with different talents coming together for a common good. A particularly moving moment came when Mrs. Patricia Williams, an elderly woman who had started a community garden in her neighborhood, was invited to light a special candle. She moved slowly but with dignity toward the altar, her weathered hands steady as she held the taper. "Gardens teach us that growth takes time, patience, and care," she said in her gentle voice. "The same is true for communities. We must tend to each other with the same love we give to our plants." Charlotte was deeply moved by Mrs. Williams' words and the simple wisdom they contained. She thought about the gardens at home and how much work went into making them beautiful. Realizing that building strong communities required similar dedication and care, the candle lighting ceremony continued with representatives from different community groups. A firefighter who had saved lives during a dangerous apartment building fire, a social worker who had helped dozens of families find stable housing, a librarian who had created literacy programs for adults learning to read. Each person who approached the altar represented countless others who worked quietly to make their communities better. The growing collection of lit candles created a warm, flickering glow that seemed to symbolize the hope and goodness these individuals brought to the world. Louis was mesmerized by the dancing flames. Counting each new candle as it was lit, he didn't fully understand all the stories being told, but he could feel the importance of what was happening and the reverence with which everyone treated these ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The children began to realize that they were witnessing something truly special, not just a religious service, but a celebration of the human spirit and the capacity for good that existed in people from all backgrounds and walks of life. It was a lesson in humility, service, and the true meaning of leadership that would stay with them for years to come. The atmosphere in Westminster Abbey shifted as the service moved into its most interactive portion. The Archbishop announced that children from the congregation would be invited to participate in a special ceremony, and excitement rippled through the younger members of the audience. George felt a flutter of nervousness, mixed with anticipation. He had attended many formal events, but this felt different, more personal and meaningful than the usual ceremonial occasions. Charlotte straightened her dress and checked that her hair was still neat, while Louis bounced slightly in his seat with barely contained enthusiasm. "We invite all the young people here today to help us create a wall of wishes," the Archbishop explained, gesturing toward a large wooden frame covered with white paper that had been set up near the altar. "Each child may write or draw something they hope for their community in the coming year." The invitation was extended to everyone, but naturally, many eyes turned toward the royal children to see if they would participate. Catherine gave her children an encouraging nod, and slowly they rose from their seats, along with dozens of other young people throughout the Abbey. The walk to the front felt longer than usual to George, who was acutely aware of the cameras and the watching crowd. But as he approached the wall of wishes, he saw children of all ages gathering around with colored markers and crayons, their faces bright with excitement about sharing their hopes and dreams. Charlotte immediately gravitated toward a group of girls near her own age who were discussing what they wanted to write. One girl, about 8 years old with curly red hair, was drawing a picture of people holding hands around a house. Another was carefully writing words in neat handwriting about wanting everyone to have enough food. "What are you going to wish for?" The red-haired girl asked Charlotte with genuine curiosity, treating her just like any other child despite recognizing who she was. Charlotte thought for a moment before answering. I think I want to wish that all children have someone to help them when they're sad or scared, she said thoughtfully. What about you? I'm wishing for my grandmother to get better, the girl replied, adding more details to her drawing. She's been sick for a long time, and my family is really worried about her. The simple honesty of the conversation touched Charlotte deeply. Here was a child dealing with real worry and fear, yet still taking time to create something hopeful and beautiful. It made her own occasional complaints about royal duties seem very small in comparison. George found himself standing next to a boy who looked to be about his own age, carefully writing something in block letters. The boy glanced up and smiled shyly, clearly recognizing the prince but trying to act natural. That's really neat writing, George said genuinely, admiring the boy's careful lettering. Thanks, the boy replied, his nervousness fading. I'm writing about wanting more places for kids to play safely in my neighborhood. We don't have a good park nearby, and sometimes it's hard to find somewhere fun to go. George nodded thoughtfully. He had never considered that some children might not have access to safe places to play, having grown up surrounded by gardens and secure areas. It opened his eyes to challenges faced by young people in different circumstances. Louis, meanwhile, had been given some chunky crayons and was enthusiastically creating a colorful picture on his section of the wall. His drawing showed stick figures under a bright yellow sun with what appeared to be a large dog and several trees. When asked what he was drawing, he explained with 5-year-old logic that he wanted everyone to be happy like his family was when they played outside together. The simplicity and innocence of his wish brought smiles to the faces of adults watching nearby. Sometimes the most profound truths came from the uncomplicated perspective of a child who just wanted everyone to experience joy and togetherness. As the children worked on their contributions to the wall of wishes, conversations naturally developed between them. Social barriers seemed to disappear as they shared markers, offered suggestions for drawings, and talked about their hopes for the future. A girl from a local school was struggling to spell friendship correctly, and Charlotte quietly helped her with the letters. George found himself holding crayons steady for a younger boy who was drawing a rainbow. Louis shared his favorite green crayon with anyone who needed it. Creating an impromptu spirit of cooperation and sharing, the adult guests watched with evident pleasure as the children worked together. This was exactly what the Together at Christmas service was meant to achieve, bringing people together across different backgrounds and circumstances, united by common hopes and values. Dr. Chun, the pediatric nurse who had spoken earlier, approached the children's area with a warm smile. She knelt down near where Charlotte was working and admired the various creations taking shape on the wall. These wishes are beautiful, she said softly. In my work at the hospital, I see every day how important hope and kindness are for healing. What you're creating here will inspire everyone who sees it. Her words carried special weight because the children could see that she truly understood the value of hope and positive thinking in difficult situations. They worked with even more care and thoughtfulness, knowing that their contributions would be meaningful to others. The wall of wishes began to fill with colorful drawings and heartfelt messages. Pictures of families, houses, animals, and rainbows mixed with carefully written words about peace, health, friendship, and safety. Each contribution reflected the innocent but profound concerns and hopes of young hearts. George stepped back to look at the growing collection of wishes and felt genuinely moved by what he saw. These children, from all different backgrounds and circumstances, shared remarkably similar hopes for safety, happiness, love, and community. It reinforced his growing understanding that despite differences in privilege or position, people fundamentally wanted the same things. The ceremony continued as each child finished their contribution and returned to their seats. But the spirit of connection and shared purpose that had developed around the wall of wishes continued to energize the entire congregation. Back in their seats, the three royal children felt a new energy and connection to the service around them. The experience of working alongside other children on the Wall of Wishes had transformed their understanding of what this gathering truly meant. They were no longer just observers at a formal event, but active participants in something much larger than themselves. The Archbishop returned to the center of the abbey and invited the congregation to share in a moment of reflection. The lighting dimmed slightly, and the only illumination came from the many candles that had been lit throughout the ceremony, and the soft glow filtering through the ancient, stained glass windows. "Let us think about the year that has passed," he said gently, "and the many ways we have been blessed by the kindness and service of others. Let us also consider how we might be blessings to others in the year to come." The silence that followed was profound but not uncomfortable. Throughout the abbey, hundreds of people sat quietly with their own thoughts, considering the wisdom they had heard and the examples of service that had been celebrated. George found his mind wandering through memories of the past year. He thought about the people he had met during royal visits, the charity events he had attended with his parents, and the stories he had heard today. Slowly, he began to form ideas about how he might use his position to help others. Not just when he became king someday, but right now, while he was still young. Charlotte was remembering the conversation with the girl who had drawn the picture of people holding hands. She realized that helping others didn't always require grand gestures or special programs. Sometimes it was as simple as listening carefully when someone was worried about their grandmother, or helping with spelling when someone was struggling with a word. Louis, in his 5-year-old way, was mostly thinking about how much fun it had been to share crayons and help other children with their pictures. He liked the feeling of being helpful and making new friends, even if he didn't understand all the complex ideas the adults were discussing. The moment of reflection was broken gently by the sound of a solo violin playing a beautiful melody that seemed to float through the ancient space. The musician, an elderly man who taught music at several London schools, played with the skill and emotion that comes from a lifetime of sharing music with others. As the violin melody continued, people throughout the congregation began to share brief testimonials about community members who had made differences in their lives. The format was informal and voluntary, with individuals simply standing where they were and speaking from the heart. An elderly woman near the middle of the abbey stood slowly and spoke about her neighbor, a teenager who shoveled her driveway every winter without being asked. A man in the back rows talked about the local pharmacist who had checked on his elderly mother during her recovery from surgery, going far beyond his professional duties. Each testimonial was brief but powerful, painting a picture of communities where people looked out for each other in countless small but meaningful ways. The children listened with growing amazement at the many forms kindness could take. Mother with 2 young children stood to thank the bus driver who always waited an extra moment when he saw her running to catch the bus with her stroller. Her voice was emotional as she explained how that small gesture had made difficult days manageable during a challenging time in her life. Charlotte was particularly moved by this story because it showed how someone doing their regular job could make it special by adding kindness and consideration. It made her think about her own royal duties and how she could approach them with extra thoughtfulness for others. The testimonials continued with stories about teachers who stayed late to help struggling students, shop owners who quietly helped families facing financial difficulties, and neighbors who organized informal support networks for single parents and elderly residents. George began to understand that real leadership wasn't about having authority over others, but about finding ways to serve and support the people around you. These ordinary citizens were demonstrating the kind of leadership he hoped to show someday as king. A particularly touching moment came when a young father stood to thank the staff at a local children's hospital where his daughter had been treated. He specifically mentioned how the nurses had not only provided excellent medical care, but had also helped his family feel less scared and alone during a frightening time. Dr. Chun, who was seated nearby, smiled with tears in her eyes as she recognized that he was talking about her hospital. It was a powerful reminder that the work celebrated during this service had real, lasting impacts on real families facing real challenges. The violin music swelled again as the testimonials drew to a close, and the Archbishop invited everyone to participate in a final song together. The hymn chosen was "Make Me a Channel of Your Peace," a modern composition that perfectly captured the spirit of service and community that had been celebrated throughout the afternoon. As hundreds of voices joined together in song, the royal children sang with genuine enthusiasm. The words spoke about being instruments of peace, hope, and comfort in the world, and they could feel the power of so many people making that commitment together. Louis sang loudly and cheerfully, not worrying about hitting every note perfectly, but simply enjoying the experience of making music with a large group. Charlotte sang thoughtfully, considering the meaning of each verse and how it applied to her own life and future. George sang with growing confidence, feeling for the first time that he truly understood what it meant to serve others. The abbey filled with the sound of collective hope and determination, creating an atmosphere that would be remembered by everyone present long after the service ended. It was a moment that perfectly captured the spirit of Christmas and the power of community working together for good. As the final hymn concluded, a special surprise was announced that no one in the congregation had expected. The Archbishop explained that this year, for the first time, the service would include a presentation ceremony recognizing young people who had made significant contributions to their communities throughout the year. "We believe it's important to show that service and leadership are not limited by age," he said with a warm smile. "Some of our most inspiring examples of kindness and dedication come from our youngest community members." Excitement buzzed through the crowd as 5 young people, ranging in age from 8 to 16, were invited to come forward. Each had been nominated by their communities for exceptional acts of service, and their stories were about to be shared with the entire congregation. The first young person called forward was Emma Rodriguez, the 12-year-old who had organized toy drives for homeless shelters that Charlotte had heard about earlier. Emma walked to the front with quiet confidence, her dark hair neatly braided and her simple blue dress appropriate for the solemn occasion. As Emma's story was told in more detail, the royal children learned that she had not only collected toys, but had also organized other children in her school to create handmade cards and drawings for families staying in shelters. Her work had brought joy to hundreds of children during what was often a very difficult time in their lives. Charlotte was deeply impressed by Emma's initiative and creativity. It seemed remarkable that someone only a few years older than herself had identified a problem and then developed such an effective solution. It made Charlotte realize that she didn't need to wait until she was an adult to start making meaningful contributions to her community. The second young person honored was Marcus Thompson, a 14-year-old who had started a program teaching younger children to play football in neighborhoods that lacked organized youth activities. Marcus had noticed that many children in his area had nothing to do after school and had convinced local volunteers to help him create safe, fun programming. George listened with admiration as Marcus's achievements were described. The teenager had not only provided activities for younger children, but had also created opportunities for them to build friendships, learn teamwork, and develop confidence. It was exactly the kind of practical, positive impact that George hoped to make through his own future work. The third honoree was Asha Patel, a 16-year-old who had created a tutoring program pairing high school students with elementary children struggling with reading. Her program had helped dozens of young students improve their skills while also giving older students valuable experience in teaching and mentoring. The thoughtfulness and organization required for Asha's project impressed all 3 royal children. They could see that she had identified a real need and had found a way to address it that benefited both younger and older students. It was a perfect example of how good solutions often help multiple groups at once. The fourth young person recognized was 10-year-old James Chun, Dr. Chun's nephew, who had started a letter-writing campaign to elderly residents in local nursing homes. James had recruited friends from his school to write monthly letters to seniors who didn't receive regular visitors, creating connections that had brightened many lives. Louis was particularly interested in James's story because James was closer to his own age. It showed Louis that even young children could find meaningful ways to help others, and that simple gestures like writing letters could make people very happy. The final honoree was Sophie Williams, a 15-year-old who had organized environmental cleanup projects in local parks and had started a community garden that provided fresh vegetables for a local food bank. Her work had not only improved the neighborhood's appearance but had also provided healthy food for families in need. As each young person was presented with a special certificate recognizing their service, the congregation applauded enthusiastically. The royal children clapped with genuine appreciation, feeling inspired by these examples of young people taking initiative to solve problems in their communities. The Archbishop then made an unexpected announcement that caused a stir of surprise throughout the abbey. He explained that the royal children had been invited to present special gifts to each of the young honorees, gifts that would help them continue and expand their community service projects. George, Charlotte, and Louis were escorted to the front of the abbey, where they were given small wrapped packages to present to each young honoree. As they handed out the gifts, they had brief opportunities to speak with each recipient about their work. Charlotte spoke with Emma about her toy drive and asked thoughtful questions about how she had gotten other children involved. She was impressed by Emma's practical approach and her genuine care for the families she was helping. George was fascinated by Marcus's football program and wanted to know more about how he had convinced adults to volunteer their time to help. Marcus explained that he had simply started by asking people directly, and that most were eager to help once they understood what he was trying to accomplish. Louis was delighted to meet James and immediately began planning how he might help write letters to elderly people. James patiently explained the program and promised to help Louis get started if he was seriously interested. The gifts turned out to be funding, certificates that would help each young person expand their programs, money for more toys and supplies. For Emma, equipment for Marcus's football program, books for Asha's tutoring project, writing supplies for James's letter campaign, and gardening tools for Sophie's environmental work. As the presentations concluded, the royal children returned to their seats feeling energized and inspired. They had not only witnessed examples of young leadership, but had also participated directly in supporting those efforts. It had transformed their understanding of their own roles and possibilities. The recognition ceremony had shown everyone in the congregation that making a positive difference was not something that required waiting until adulthood. Young people could identify problems, develop solutions, and create lasting positive change in their communities right now. The service was drawing toward its conclusion, but the impact of what the children had experienced and learned would last far beyond this single afternoon in Westminster Abbey. The Together at Christmas service was approaching its final moments, but the energy and inspiration in Westminster Abbey had only grown stronger throughout the afternoon. The Archbishop returned to the center of the ancient space, his face glowing with the satisfaction of having witnessed something truly special. As we prepare to leave this sacred space and return to our daily lives, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed congregation, let us remember that the real work begins now. The stories we have heard and the connections we have made today are meant to inspire action in the days and weeks ahead. The three royal children sat forward in their seats, completely engaged with his words. The afternoon had changed something fundamental in their understanding of service, community, and their own potential to make meaningful differences in the world. The Archbishop continued, Christmas reminds us that the greatest gifts are not the ones we find under trees, but the ones we give through our actions, our kindness, and our commitment to caring for one another. As he spoke, the wall of wishes, created by the children earlier, was carefully moved to a more prominent position, where everyone could see the colorful collection of hopes and dreams. The sight of all those heartfelt messages and drawings served as a powerful visual reminder of the shared humanity that connected everyone present. Charlotte looked at the wall and could pick out her own contribution among all the others. She felt proud to be part of something so beautiful and meaningful, and she began to think seriously about projects she might start to help other children in the coming year. The service concluded with a final blessing that seemed to settle over the congregation like a warm embrace. As the Archbishop's words echoed through the abbey, people throughout the crowd bowed their heads in reflection, gratitude, and commitment to carry forward the spirit of service they had celebrated together. When the formal conclusion was announced, the congregation began to file out slowly, but many people lingered to continue conversations that had begun during the service. The royal children found themselves surrounded by some of the young honorees, and other children who wanted to share ideas about community service projects. Emma Rodriguez approached Charlotte with genuine excitement. "I was thinking," she said, "maybe we could work together on something. I know you probably have access to resources that could really help a lot of children." Charlotte was thrilled by the suggestion and immediately began thinking about possibilities. "I would love that," she replied enthusiastically. "We could combine your experience organizing toy drives with some of the programs my family supports." Meanwhile, George was deep in conversation with Marcus about the logistics of running youth programs. Marcus was explaining how he had learned to work with local councils and community centers, information that George found incredibly valuable for understanding how real change happened at the local level. Louis had gravitated toward James Chun and was already planning his first letter to an elderly resident. James had offered to help him get started and had promised to introduce him to some of the nursing home residents, who would be especially excited to receive mail from a young pen pal. Dr. Chun approached Catherine and William to express her gratitude for the children's participation in the service. "They were genuinely engaged," she said warmly. "You could see that they understood the importance of what we were celebrating today." Catherine smiled proudly as she watched her children continuing to interact naturally with the other young people. "This kind of experience is exactly what we hope for them," she replied. "Learning that service is not a burden of their position, but an opportunity to be part of something meaningful." As the family finally began to make their way toward the exit, they were stopped repeatedly by people wanting to share their appreciation for the children's participation. But these weren't formal expressions of respect for their royal status. They were genuine thanks from community members who felt that the children had truly understood and embraced the spirit of the day outside the abbey. The late afternoon light was beginning to fade and the air had grown even colder. But the warmth generated by the service seemed to follow everyone as they emerged from the ancient building. The royal children walked more slowly than usual toward their waiting car, reluctant for the experience to end. They were already making plans for how they could stay connected with some of the young people they had met and how they could get involved in similar service projects throughout the year. George was thinking about the football program Marcus had described and wondering if similar initiatives might be helpful in other communities. Charlotte was already sketching plans for collaborating with Emma on expanded toy and supply drives for families in need. Louis was simply excited about writing letters and making new elderly friends. As they settled into their car for the drive home, all three children were unusually quiet, processing everything they had experienced. The service had been unlike any royal event they had attended before because it had focused not on ceremony or tradition, but on real people doing real work to help their communities. Catherine noticed their thoughtful mood and smiled. "What did you think of today?" she asked gently. Charlotte answered first. "It made me realize that helping people doesn't have to wait until I'm grown up," she said. "There are things I could start doing right now." George nodded in agreement. "I never really understood before how many different ways there are to serve others," he added. "It's not just about royal duties or official events." Louis, with typical 5-year-old directness, simply said, "I want to be like those kids who help people." They seemed really happy. As their car pulled away from Westminster Abbey, the three royal children were already planning how they would carry the lessons and inspiration of the Together at Christmas service into their daily lives. The afternoon had planted seeds that would grow into a lifetime commitment to meaningful service and genuine connection with the communities they would one day serve. The fifth annual Together at Christmas service had achieved its goal perfectly, not just celebrating existing service and kindness, but inspiring new generations to continue that vital work in the years ahead.